Certainly in that vein, but bringing up somewhat of a paradox. There are two old stories from two different persuasions that might bring awareness of what this paradox is for us. The first is that story of Shibli. Now, he was a grand noble. He'd had illustrious posts in the court of the emir of the day. But he'd had a moment of awakening, and he decided that he was going to seek after truth and enlightenment. And so he went to the great Master Junaid, and in a very arrogant way, being of the nobility, he said, "I believe you know divine truth. Either give it to me or sell it to me." And Junaid responded, "If I sold it to you, you would not have its worth. If I gave it to you, you would never know its value." So, somewhat chastened by this, Shibli said, "Well, what is it that I have to do?" And the Master Junaid said, "You must immerse yourself in water." So Shibli begged, "Please tell me what it is that I must do to immerse myself." So Junaid said, "First, go out and become a seller of sulfur." And so he did, and he became a very successful salesman of sulfur. But after a year, when he came back, the Master Junaid said, "Now go out and be a beggar." Now, Shibli became a beggar, but he was not at all successful. But when he came back to the Master, he himself knew that he still had arrogance and pride. So Junaid said to him, "In the time that you were governor of a certain province, you were despotic and cruel in the way that you treated people. Now go to that province, because now to everyone you have become nothing. Now let everyone become nothing for you." So Shibli went off to that province, and he found everyone that he had mistreated and made recompense to them, except one man, so it said. But when he came back, the Master Junaid said to him, "There is still in you pride. Go out and be a beggar once again, and bring back to me whatever it is that you gain." So when Shibli came back with his begging bowl, whatever it was filled with, the Master took from him and gave to the poor. This went on for some long time. But it was not until Shibli became a servant of the servants of the Master that he finally found himself without a vestige of arrogance and pride. But Shibli still, even going out in this state, with not a trace of arrogance and pride in his heart, was mocked by people. And he would say to them, "To your mind, I am mad. And to my mind, you are sane. But my madness is from the power of, and your sanity is from the power of ignorance. I pray to increase my. So leaving that word absent from this story, there's a second story about a prince. His father died and he was the second son, and the soothsayers said that it was he who was worthy to be king. But this second son abhorred the pomp and ceremony, the falseness of the palace life and what went on there. All he wanted was nirvana. So he tried to escape, but he only got as far as the palace gardens, and he was caught and chained in golden chains. But he was able, with the assistance of a faithful servant, to obtain the clothing of a beggar and be released from his chains. And so he escaped from the palace. When they had not gone very far, the prince released his faithful servant, giving him recompense, and went on, where he found a coterie of Dakinis, and came under their tutelage to learn the ways and purify the feminine in him. He then went on and came under the tutelage of masters who taught him the way of Tantra. And so it went on. Then he became a wandering mendicant, taking his begging bowl from place to place. And one day he came to a town where he was drawn to a tavern, which happened to be a brothel. He was drawn to enter that place, where he recognized amongst the prostitutes a Dakini who had taken this form. She looked deeply into his eyes and said, "Your centers have now been purified, but you still have pride and arrogance the size of a pea in your heart." Now, having trodden the path that he'd trodden, he could not understand this. Where was this pride and arrogance? She said, "In my heart." But with that, with a quizzical smile, she filled his begging bowl with rancid slops and handed it back to him and sent him on his way. When he went outside the door of the tavern, he threw the slops in a drain while the Dakini was watching. And mockingly she said, "How can a gourmet reach nirvana?" With that, he went to the cremation grounds where he had been residing to ponder on what had transpired. Not able to even think of how he would rid himself of what was perceived, he was inspired to go to the seaside where the fishermen drew in their nets full of fish. But, as is the way, they offered him some of their catch, but he refused to accept anything but the innards of the fish, which he lived on for 12 long years. After these 12 years, he knew that there was no longer a trace within him of pride, arrogance. But as he set out to become the great teacher and sage that he was destined to be, some people would mock him, calling him Luipa, the fish gut eater. But the many who were brought to realization through him lovingly called him their master, Luipa, the fish gut eater. In the first story, what is this that Shibli has said? To your mind, I'm mad. To my mind, you're sane. But my madness is from the power of what is the paradox that we can see with this? What is the paradox that we can recognize from these two stories? I'll tell you my take on it, which is not usually the case. There are those who will come and have come over the years to visit. And the stories are different but similar. Because in every story it's recognized that whatever tried to seduce us, success, a relationship, whatever it was never successful. And the answer that's given is because you have the mark on your forehead. I belong to God. I belong to the divine. Doesn't this story illuminate this for us? The nobility, we can give it that name because it's in the stories. Nobility. Spirit, what is it in you? What is it that we have to come to acknowledge that's been there all along? Because the stories are the same. The absence of any kind of success, as would be called successful, relationship would be successful, whatever it might be. Not being allowed to be seduced by the world, a being, even a master. Why? In these stories we can recognize it. Nobility of spirit, we can't claim it when there's no trace left, but we can recognize what it is. What name would you give it? What name, how would you finish this sentence? My madness is because of the power of. What is it in us? What name would you give it?